Hello, I'm Ed Ludwig for the Doylestown Historical Society, and this is the 11th in our series of video history presentations. For the historical record, today is October 28, 2002, and we're here in Doylestown Township in the home of our guest Margaret Ritchie and her husband Dr. Thomas Ritchie at Pine Run Community just off of Ferry Road. The mission of our society is to preserve and commemorate Doylestown's persons, places, and events so that they may be long remembered. And it is in that spirit and for that purpose that we interview those whose recollections of our area and interesting experiences span extensive periods of time. Today's interview is titled Of Stone and Dreams, Margaret by Ritchie, Historic Architecture's Good Friend. Of Stone and Dreams is the name of a booklet she wrote some years ago. And Margaret, who confided to me that she is now in a double-digit year, starting with the number 8, although you never think so, is a good friend in more ways than one, as you will soon hear. She's interviewed by Kathy Auerbach, who has also devoted herself to historic preservation. Both of them are members of the Bucks County Community College's Historic Preservation Advisory Board, and they have known each other for a long time. Kathy is an instructor in BC3's Historic Preservation Department, and for many years she worked for the one-time Bucks County Conservancy and directed the effort that placed much of downtown Doylestown on the National Historic Register back in the early 1980s. As you will also hear, Margaret Ritchie has had a fascinating and meaningful life. She's traveled widely, studied in many places. She and her husband of 68 years, they were married in 1935, lived at the By family residence from 1945 until 1996, just 6 years ago. That residence, Bycroft Farm in Hollycong, as her brother Ranulph By told us in his interview last year, was acquired by an ancestor of theirs, believe it or not, in 1699. She has written and lectured and been involved in numerous historic preservation programs, as well as the societally caring projects of the American Friends Service Committee, including 10 summers of work camps. She remains active with several historical preservation boards and groups and is a highly recognized authority in this field. I think you'll agree the right words for her are actively and conscientiously committed to the betterment of our community. Our many thanks to Margaret Ritchie and to Kathy Auerbach, and as always to Chris and Michelle of Television for their creative filming and helpful cooperation with our society.
Well, thank you, Ed, and thanks to the Doylestown Historical Society also for sponsoring these valuable interviews. My name is Catherine Auerbach, and I've had the pleasure of knowing Margaret for 25 years. And it's always a delight whenever I meet Margaret and we speak together. Margaret, your name is really synonymous with Bucks County, with its beautiful architecture and the heritage of the Quakerism and historical settlement heritage, as though you've lived here your entire life. But actually, your background crosses the lines of towns, cities, states, and even oceans. Could you tell us a little bit about your early background and experiences?
I was born in Princeton mainly because my father was getting his degree there, which happened just after I was born, which was in 1913. And then a year or so later, we moved to Vassar College, where he had his first teaching job. And there we were, and I remember he came into our bedroom and took me out of bed and my little brother out of bed and to the window to see the Fine Arts Building burn down. He thought we would be interested and wide awake, but we fell asleep in his arms. We needed our nighttime sleep more than we did a look at our first big fire in life. But my mother was, she was a little bit irritable and wanted very much to go back to visit her family, which was in the Netherlands. And the war was preventing us from doing that. But as soon as it was over, we made our plans, and my mother took me and my little brother Ranulph to the Netherlands, where we had a very large family. And I want to say now, Kathy, that family over there was of enormous influence on my life and also on my brother's life. There is a big family in Holland, and they are somewhat clannish because they're loyal to each other and they don't worry about where they are in society. Where they are in the family, that is important to them. I had 60 cousins my age, all of whom I could play with if I wanted to, and you can imagine that was fun. The family had summer places up in the hills in the south of Holland. Gelderland is the name of the county there. And in the winter they lived in Amsterdam or The Hague or even some other cities like Utrecht.
Margaret, you talked about your grandparents, I guess somewhat Victorian in their demeanor, and your grandfather being very autocratic.
Yes,
he was
very autocratic.
Strict.
And at one time at the breakfast table, my brother Ranulph refused to eat his oatmeal. He really didn't like it, and I'm sure he suffered if he had to eat it. Well, his grandfather said, "You must eat it, Ranulph. If not, I will put you in a cellar." So Ranulph stuck firm to his own idea, and he refused to eat that oatmeal. So down the cellar he went, and the grandfather closed the door. And Ranulph was very unhappy, and he's never forgotten that. Mm-hmm. But that didn't happen to me. At the end of our year in Amsterdam and the country, we went to Italy, mm-hmm. and there we spent 3 months in Venice and 9 months in Florence. In Florence we lived in a villa with wonderful people who were called von Munchausen. Von Munchausen was a rebel of some sort in the First World War, but I don't think that he was the man, although he had been killed and I never saw him. However, there were 2 sons living with their mother, and they had to take us in because they needed someone to help them care for the villa. And we were the chosen ones, which is very nice. We played with Marco and Caio, and they were the ones who taught me how to smoke.
Oh,
they took me up in the tree top and said they were going to roll one for me and I was to smoke it. If I wanted to, of course, but that was implied. They didn't doubt me for a minute. They thought, of course I would want to smoke. However, I was forbidden to do that, but I did it anyway, and really almost gagged with the horror of the taste. So that was my introduction to smoking. And in Venice, we had very interesting times because there was a chance to learn how to swim by taking a vaporetta, a little ferry boat, to the Lido, which was the swimming beach, which the Venetian people used on a Saturday or Sunday. And on the vaporetto, I told everybody that I was going to learn to swim that day. I surely thought I was going to learn to swim. You didn't do anything without learning how to do it. I got into the water and I didn't want to go in above my ankles, you see. So it was rather difficult. And I had to be very humble on the way home because there were other people going on the back on the same vaporetto, and they asked me, "Did you learn to swim, Margaret?" And I had to say, "No, I didn't." So that was very sad. But Venice was fun. The gondola was fun. The only thing that was really bad in Venice was that our nursemaid who was with us, a very lovely Dutch girl from a noble family who had a title, but she wanted to do something exciting, so she went to Venice with my father and myself. And she was walking along with our little brother Edwin, who had been born in the meantime, and while we were in Holland. He was only about a year old now, and suddenly I was up running with my brother Ranulph, and I saw him pushed into the canal by a little boy, and I didn't know what to do, but I yelled at him, for goodness sake, kick, kick, kick. I'm sure he couldn't hear me. He was splashing like crazy. And then I ran back to the Frau, the babysitter, and she ran down toward Ranulph, but another man had gotten in his gondola and rescued him beforehand. So he was placed into her arms and taken home. So that was all right, but she was very much embarrassed by what had happened. And she forgot about little Edwin, and I went back and took him by the hand and took him home too, which was on the other side of the canal from where we were at that point. So that was an interesting experience for me. I never forgot the fact that he was pushed into the canal.
Your father was studying
Yes,
art?
He was studying art. He was studying Italian art, and in Holland he had studied Dutch art, the masters of the 16th and 17th century. And in Venice, we went to see the bridge over the Bridge of Sighs to see where the prisoners were put before they were beheaded. And I remember as a little girl being dreadfully hurt by that. And as I went across the Bridge of Sighs, I kept looking on all sides in case somebody was going to take me, put me in the dungeon there. So I felt deeply sorry for these poor people, and had an empathy for them in that sense.
Well, Margaret, Venice certainly provided you with strong impressions at a young age.
It did. It did indeed. And they've clung to me, as all my experiences have, because they were meaningful, and with every one, I changed a little bit. I grew, or I began to appreciate other people at a very tender age.
You returned to the United States. Your father got a job at Swarthmore?
He didn't get a job there, but he decided to live there. He became the curator of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which position he kept for about 8 years. And we settled in Swarthmore by the choice of my parents, because it was near Philadelphia and it was a college town, and they thought it would be interesting. So we were in Swarthmore, and I went to Mary Lyons School there, a private girls' school, which was great fun. I really was in my element at school always. I was very mischievous, and I did things like bringing a little dog into the class one day and locking him in the closet. Well, he was only a puppy, and so his water ran all over under the store into the classroom. And the teacher, she liked me, and she didn't know what to do. She didn't want to scold me, but she said, "Margaret, you'll have to take that dog home." So I left class. We lived across the street from the school, and took the dog home, triumphant, because she was so nice about it, not because I was a good girl.
You were lucky.
Yeah.
Your father built the house there, didn't he?
He built the house. He designed it. In the 20s, everyone was building Tudor Revival homes, and my father liked that style very much because he was an Anglophile, and he loved everything that seemed to go back to England or was based on English tradition. And so he built this great house, which I have a picture of here, and it was marvelous. Only for one thing that bothered all of us children, which was that he had a knight in armor, which my mother had given him as a wedding present. And he put that on the landing and the stairs, and it had a visor which was closed most of the time. But if we were bad, he would open the visor, and eyes would stare out at us, cold eyes. And if we didn't go to bed at night when he told us to, he'd say, "You'd better go, I'm going to open the visor." And then we would all dash upstairs because we didn't want to have those cold fish eyes looking at us as we did so. But it was a lovely home, and I was able to walk to town, walk to college, to the college if I wanted to, But while I was at Mary Lyon, I just ran across the street. And I loved those years, 5 years there. I was on the swimming team and did very well in sports anyway, so I always enjoyed myself in school. Being somewhat athletic always makes a difference in school because you have fun with the teams. So,
But you traveled back to Europe as well.
yes, we traveled. Every other summer my mother would want to go back to see her family, and the children could come out of school and go with her. We didn't all go every time because it was rather a big group to take to cousins to stay with them. So she chose one or two, and the other stayed home with a nursemaid and my father.
You have 3 brothers total.
I have 3
correct?
brothers. I have
Yeah.
that little brother. I have an older brother who spent a year that I was in Amsterdam with his father in Bryn Mawr, where he had his next job. My father went to Bryn Mawr and taught, and then he kept Gerard with him. And then later on, they joined us, and we all went to Venice together and Florence.
I think it was a very important point in your family's life when your father was able to buy Old Congress, buy the farm that had been in the family for many generations, to become your homestead.
Yes, well, that happened. And my father built this lovely house in Swarthmore, but he didn't want to stay in the museum because the director of the museum, Fitz Kimball, was a real stern master and very much wanting his own way. And my father had ideas of his own, so he wanted to go into business for himself. At the end of the 20s, he opened a studio on Rittenhouse Square, which was a place very full of artistic shops. And that didn't last very long because the crash came. And he went to, he was looking around. He knew where our family homestead was in Bucks County. And he had seen it when he was 18 years old, and even as he was a child too. But at 18, he decided he wanted to have that place if he could. And this was the time he thought he could do it. It so happened that the cousin who owned the homestead was running a school in Westchester called Darlington Seminary, and it failed during the Depression, along with a lot of other places, of course, and people didn't feel too bad about it, although it was tough on their personal lives. So the farm, as we called it then, came up for sale, and my father was able to buy it. And then he began moving out to the country. He decided that he would live there, and my mother would stay in Swarthmore, and she would keep the house. So that's how it worked out for a while. And we began to go by weekends, to the farm, and we clamored to do that. That was a great adventure for us because there was no water, and there was no heat, and there was no electricity except a bulb hanging from the ceiling, and the water made it possible only to have a privy. And of course we hated that, but we had to do that if we wanted to go to the farm with my father. In a couple of years he was able to restore it and give it everything it needed to be comfortable in the 20th century. And then he moved to Bucks County permanently and lived in the studio. After he fixed up the carriage house, it became a very fine studio for him. And he lived there, and those of us who were getting along in our teenage were beginning to become independent, going to college, and making decisions for ourselves. So I went to Swarthmore College, and I walked there from this house. And I didn't enjoy Swarthmore College for that reason. There was only one other day pupil who had to do that, and that's not the point in college or any graduate school you go to. It's more fun to be there with a gang. So after 2 years, I decided I would go back to Europe. I was very familiar with it now, having been to Paris and Venice and Italy and England and Germany. And so I felt at home there all over. And I did go. I took $200 that my grandfather had left me when he died, and that was going to take care of me for almost a year. It seemed a little meager, and it was, and my parents had to help me out now and then. I decided to go to Germany because I spoke German already to some extent, and I had taken it in school. Before I left Swarthmore, I was sent to Doylestown for 2 years. Doylestown was a Quaker boarding school, and it was fairly strict, but also full of love and friendship and Quakerism, where I learned something about the faith that I had grown up in. A group of friends, and they've always been together. They're called the ASAF group, and those of us who are still around still see each other now and then. I did meet my husband through this group, and we didn't really fall in love for the first couple of years at all, but we did after that, and that led to our marriage in 1935.
And you were married at the Buckingham Friends Meeting House, and reception held at Old Congress.
Yes.
Is that
Yes.
a very marvelously traditional way to be married right in the neighborhood and at your family farmstead? Tom is a Quaker also.
He was a Quaker too, and it was quite appropriate for us to be married in the meeting house. Tom came from an Orthodox family. I came from a Hicksite family, and the Orthodox were a little stricter in their Quakerism. And my husband, believe it or not, grew up not being allowed to play games on Sunday, and certainly not allowed to gamble, certainly not allowed to smoke or drink. And he was, in that sense, conservative. I taught him not all those things, but a couple of them, and we got along very well for 68 years. And here we are now, still married.
Sort of, you were talking about each of your grandparents or grandmothers and how they almost embodied the differences between the Hicksite and Orthodox.
Yeah, I think you can see it
Quaker.
from the clothes they are wearing and the work they are doing. Tom's mother is a little old, perfect lady from the old days, the Victorian days, and my grandmother was more cityfied. She actually lived in Germantown, and just a little more sophisticated in that way.
You were saying how she would wear jewelry, all the jewelry.
She has
difference,
jewelry, yes,
yeah.
she has jewelry. And my grandmother Ritchie also had jewelry, but it was more simple than the other group of Quakers would choose. But it was a good mixture of the two, and our family and children, there was nothing of difference at all in the way they were brought up with any other group of Quakers, because the split in the Quaker faith was an unhappy event. It started in 1828, and now in 1950, our great leader, Rufus Jones, persuaded everyone that they should be one group. And that's what happened. And that made Quakerism more powerful. And we'll be talking about Quakerism in a little bit, I think.
Mm-hmm. But you
now,
and Tom lived first at the farm and then
yes,
moved about.
we married and lived there the first year, and then we decided we wanted to be alone. And we lived in Lahaska a year, and then we lived on a farm on Turk Road here in Doylestown. And that was lovely. We lived with John and Margaret Lester, and they were lovely people who are also Quakers. He had taught in the Hill School at Pottstown, and they shepherded us around. They were very sweet to us and championed us when we needed help. So we had a wonderful influence from them.
But you moved to New York.
Yes, we moved to New York because Tom thought he ought to get a master's degree in education if he was going to be a teacher, which job he had accepted in Lahaska because it was offered to him by a group of rather educated men in Bucks County at that time, and they chose him from a whole group of young students graduating from college who had no jobs, because that was a problem in 1934. So he was very grateful to them and decided he would try to become a leader in education. But his heart wasn't in it. So although he got his master's, when he got then a job in Bronxville, New York, which paid about twice as much as a Quaker school in Pennsylvania, we decided to go to Bronxville because we wanted to have children. And Bronxville was a very sophisticated town. If I tell you now that the general price of the general salary of the Bronxville gentleman was $13,000, it won't sound like anything, but that's what it was. And we didn't earn anywhere near that much. In those days, you didn't, and you didn't need as much. But we had to live in an apartment, and we didn't want to do that. And when my father offered to give us the house to live in, Old Congress to live in, we decided to come back to Pennsylvania, and Tom at the same time decided he was going to do the thing he wanted to do all his life, which was to become a doctor. So at age 30, he began studying medicine. And for 8 years or so, we hardly saw him at all, literally not at all. Saturdays and Sundays he was doing medicine and going into classes and lab work, and the rest of the time he would go in to New York too after school, and the children would be in bed when he came home. So in a sense, I was their chief parent through all those years. But he went to Penn, and we could live at the farm, and he could commute during the week. But I was in charge of everything. I lived there alone with the children for 6 years, and then 2 more when he was an intern and a resident at Abington Hospital. So I learned to take care of myself and the children, and I learned to make decisions. I made decisions, all the decisions with the children. I had to.
Well, that's a big rambling house.
It's a big rambling
Yes.
house, and we had a lot of work to do there, and it was great. It was really great. The children went to Friends School up on the hill in Bucking in Lahaska, and
They could walk.
they did walk. And this picture here can show you how they walked, but they didn't walk very often because 202 was a dangerous road. And I must mention now here that in the summers, Tom was also free of Penn Med School, and we went to work camps. And this is something that we had picked up because we were Quakers, and the American Friends Service Committee, which is rather the best branch of the Quakers, that's a best known branch of the Quakers, had started these work camps, and for us they were wonderful. We had to volunteer there was no money involved, and yet we made friends in a way that I learned was only possible when you were doing work to help others, and nobody talked about money or earning or that kind of success. It was just love and friendship. We made friends that we've had all these years, and I learned again that when I loved people, that I felt as though I belonged in that area, and I felt at home. So I learned a lot through Quakerism that way, that service was really a touchstone in happy living and giving and sharing. And although we slept on army cots and washed our clothes in tubs and carried our water sometimes a quarter of a mile, it was nothing because we were having fun with college students all around us, participating in the work camps. So that was a good bit of my education and my maturing, and I've been so grateful for that possibility, which lasted for 10 summers, but then had to stop because Tom finally got into practice and he couldn't take time off like that in the summertime anymore. So that was an end. But those friends have stayed with us. and the areas have stayed with us. We went to Wales during that time and helped the miners who were out of a job with their victory gardens. They didn't call them victory gardens, but they were. They were because England had won the First World War, and then we, I don't know why the coal mines closed down the way they did, but the miners were in deep trouble, and we were able to help them and live with them. There I had my first experience with bed bugs, and that didn't make me happy. That made me sick. It's dreadful. Oh yeah, I got 100 bites, and my husband didn't get any. So we went to our leader there, an Englishman, and he said, "Oh, you poor chappies, you poor chappies." He said, "Now I'm going to take you out of that place and put you in a place that I know is clean." And so he rescued us that way. And we were going to go to a hotel in Cardiff because I was getting sicker, trying to sleep in this condition. Anyway, we got over that, and we went on to England and home eventually.
You mentioned, I think, the Welsh miners were excellent singers.
Were what?
Excellent singers.
Oh, yes. Oh, we learned that we couldn't sing at all because they asked us once to sing our national anthem, and they had been singing in part and together in one way or another all over England and, of course, Wales, and they were known for this, and they harmonized beautifully, just beautifully. But we could not sing our national anthem. It's a very difficult song to sing, and we didn't do very well with our Quaker voices. So that was an embarrassment.
The work camps took you also to Maine?
Yes, they took us to Maine, and that was beautiful. We were on the coast of Maine where the fishermen and the quarrymen were in trouble. The Friends Service Committee usually picked a place where people needed people to come help them, and so we had our happiest times there.
Well, your experience with being surrounded when you were young, with your father's studies of art, all the books that he was studying, and then, of course, designing a house. You mentioned that you had in mind studying architecture for a long time.
Oh, I did. I dreamed of it. I was interested in that at Swarthmore those first 2 years, but they weren't able to give me any background for it. And that's another reason I went away from the college. And yet, my brothers needed to have, according to my parents, needed to have a real education in order to make enough living to take care of a family, and they didn't think I needed to do that. But they were wrong, because I needed it for my own ego. I needed it because I was capable of it, and I needed it because I wanted to do it. But that didn't happen.
Well, not right away.
Not right away.
But
No.
you did pick up on it.
Yes, I did. I
Yes.
finally got my college degree at Beaver College, and they were kind enough, forward-looking enough to see that keeping house for 2 children and driving to Beaver was tantamount to doing some exercise in the afternoon. So they let me graduate, which was very nice of them. And then way after that, I decided I wanted a master's degree, because after I had raised the children, I began being interested in the old houses with my love of architecture, and I began to think about them. And then we bought a house, Tom and I and 2 other people, in Buckingham Village, and that needed repair. It needed complete overhauling, and we did that. I became the president of the little firm, and we borrowed $50,000, and that was enough to do the job. We found 30 people who were willing to back us up financially, and we paid them all back after 3 years. Their investment with 3% on top. Not a great winner.
Well, it sounds pretty good nowadays, doesn't it?
Well, it does right now.
But that's what we'd call it the Heritage Building, Buck's Heritage Building?
Buck's Heritage Building.
Right on the corner of Old
Yeah.
York Road and
Yeah.
413.
And then through that, somehow I got onto the board of the Bucks County Historical Society and began having a contact with Doylestown, and I began to see what a charming town it is with its Victorian streets. And then when the National Trust declared it one of 10 villages or small towns worth visiting over a trip around the United States, I realized that Doylestown was becoming important, and that it really did have treasures of its own. The 3 Mercer concrete buildings, one of which was a castle, and then during the early years they didn't have anything else, nor did they have a good library. But during this period, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they realized that they needed a great library, they needed a great museum for Jim Michener's collection, which after he became famous he collected. And so they got 2 more fine buildings. And now Doylestown is a very important part of Bucks County. It's the center, the heart of Bucks County, and placed in the center. And that's why it's the county seat. So I'm very happy to be in Doylestown now, and part of what's going on here, although I am still on several commissions with the Buckingham supervisors, even though I don't live there anymore, they just didn't let me resign. And also,
Well, you mentioned you were one of the founders of the Buckingham Historic Commission. I served with you on that for a number of years.
I went to Myron Fetch, who was rather conservative and didn't like my type of a sort of progressive human being. He didn't want to do that, but he did. He said, yes, if you want to start a historic commission, you may. And so he did put that through, which was great. And I was a chairman of that for a long time.
Well, you had a little influence on a gas station in
True, yes.
Buckingham.
Yeah, there was going to be a gas station, a new Getty gas station, and I was worried about what would come. And I wrote to Mr. Getty and said that we had a very special kind of architecture in Bucks County, and we didn't want to have a gas station plunked down in the middle of things, which would destroy the unity of Bucks County stone houses. To make a short story of that, he sent his architect to me, and we discussed the whole thing, and he built a stone station, and it's down on Swamp Road and 263. And it was a great success, and people wondered who in the world was going to live there. They hadn't heard what it was supposed to be, and they were surprised when it turned into a gasoline station, but also delighted, and I was very proud of that happened so successful.
Well, you started back at Penn for your master's.
Yes, people in the countryside began to ask me to give talks about the restoration we had done in Buckingham Village and the gas station. And then I thought, oh, I can't talk to people publicly without some credibility. So I decided to get my master's. And I did that, and that was very good. But I got so excited about what I was doing down there, and I realized I was getting closer and closer to having credits enough for a PhD that I would continue. And I did that until there was nothing left but my German exam and my French exam. Well, I knew I could pass both of them because luckily I'd spent a year in Germany, and I knew French from having it endlessly in school and college. So I did pass them both, and then I was set for my dissertation.
Yes, you'd studied New Hope and
I
the Perry
studied on New
family.
Hope. I did ask the committee down there at Penn if I could do something local so I wouldn't have to drive to the city, to the library every day for research. And they said, yes, you may do that. And that was great.
Yeah.
So it took me another 6 years to write my dissertation, but I did.
Well, they acknowledged you when you got your doctorate. I
Oh, yes, they
understand.
did. We went out in Franklin Field, a couple of thousand of us. It was a mob scene. But before they began giving out diplomas, the dean or perhaps it was the other fellow, the businessman who gave out the diplomas, and he's an important figure in a university too. He said, "I have something to announce to you. There is one woman graduating with her degree, and she is 73 years old." Well, everybody stood up, everybody clapped. They clapped and clapped and clapped, and they were looking at me. It was my moment in the sun.
Oh, it's
And
wonderful.
that was
though.
fun. And they all knew that I had to be the one because I was the only woman with wrinkles around, and they'd seen me about campus anyway, and had heard about me, I guess. So that was really nice of them to do that. I
Right.
appreciated it.
You spent a bit of time touring about the countryside of Bucks County, taking photographs, beautiful photographs. So I think there's a genetic link between you, the artistic talents of your brother and your father and
Photography
your
is an
nephew.
art, isn't it, Michelle? It's really an art.
And you
You
put
have to
together beautiful slide lectures. You gave some on Bucks County architecture, a series of 3. I attended them early on when the Conservancy sponsored those lectures. And you've done other slide lectures also on barns and different topics as well.
Well, I should tell you how I got those pictures. I decided that Bucks County had a wall around it, and that I wasn't going to penetrate that wall, but I would photograph only in Bucks County, so the lectures would be truly Bucks County lectures. And I did that, and it took me 2 years, and I got my material. I kept on going, though. I took more and more and more photographs. I haven't stopped, actually. I haven't stopped. But that was the material. And now it's going to the community college. They have asked for them, and it will be a resource library, the basis of a resource slide library.
You mentioned your education, but you didn't say just quite how difficult it was to even be accepted. I believe you asked Princeton.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that was when Beaver came to my rescue. Living in Hollycong, Princeton is really very close. And actually, my niece who lives in the big house now at Old Congress, she works in Princeton. So I thought I could go to Princeton University to get my degree. And I went over there and they looked at me with disdain. "We don't take women." Well, I said, "Well, maybe you better start with me because I'm all ready to come." And my father went here, he got his degree here. "Oh no," he said, "we don't take women." But you know, after they got rid of me that day, pretty soon they were taking women, young women, to be sure, but they had to open their doors to women if they wanted to be abreast of what universities were doing. I had a hard time deciding whether I would write or study architecture or something about architecture when I left Beaver. And I knew, though, that my interest in literature was as deep as my interest in architecture, but I already knew something about it, and I knew I could read the classics and the poets in my spare time. And so I decided not to study literature, but I would try to write. And so I have done that all along. I wrote a text from my brother, one of my brother's books, the Victorian Sketchbook, and I wrote a little booklet of my own. I wrote a book for the children, which had to be for special ages, and it took place, the book takes place on the farm, and in the Hollycong Spring, which is a magic Indian spring, which has always been there and is very much in the legends of Buckingham Township. And I have written many small pieces, short pieces, and poems, but I haven't done much with them. The book was almost published by Houghton Mifflin in Boston, but that didn't come off altogether. They finally turned it down by getting another reader who decided it wouldn't fly, and I never bothered to send it to another publisher.
You've had some challenges in your life.
Yeah, I guess so.
You
Yeah.
mentioned an
Oh, yes.
event of...
Yeah, when I was in Germany that year, I was invited to Norway by my friend, And it was March, when all of Norwegian young people, and older people too, go up to the mountains to ski. And so my friend Zina was going to take a trip up into the mountains with her friends, and I was there, and so I was to go along, which I did. And that was fun, and they set me up with a ski outfit. And I learned to ski, having never been on skis in this country. And one day we were going to see a glacier. It was their wish to see a glacier, and mine too. I hadn't ever seen one, and I wanted to. So I decided to go along. And when I got to the glacier, I was satisfied, but I wasn't at all sure I could get back to the hotel. And neither were they, my friends who were there. And they didn't know what to do, and they were standing around when some strangers came up and asked them if there was a problem. And they told the strangers about the problem of having me along. And this man suggested that we go on to the next hotel, two of us, one of them being me, and see if we couldn't bunk down there, and the others would go back the long haul to a place called Osa, where we had been for the first amount of time. Well, luckily, the moon came out that night. It was getting dark as I started with my friend Zina for Finse, which is where the next hotel was, and a shorter distance, as I've said. And it was very cold every night. It was down below zero, and I didn't know enough about skiing, nor did I have the stamina for skiing a long distance, up and down. One side was chasm, the other side was the mountains went up, and the trail was along the side of the mountain. My legs began to feel like lead, like wood. I lost all feeling, and I don't know how I kept going, but I did, and it was a challenge that I recognized. I knew that if I didn't keep going, I might very well die. I might go down the mountainside on skis, which is not a good idea. Well, we got there, and the hotel would not let us in. 2 girls skiing at night? That doesn't fly, said the doorman. You can't come in here. So that was rough. And he said, go to the station and see what you can find there. So we found our way to the station, and the station master said, I can put you up in a freight car. We have bunks out there, and I'll give you each a blanket, but that's all I can do for you. Well, we decided we would take that because shelter was shelter. But he said, don't miss the 4 o'clock train tomorrow morning because another one doesn't come till the afternoon. Well, we were sure we wouldn't miss the train tomorrow morning, and we didn't. We heard it coming, and we did our best to get out of the freight car quickly, and we did find a way back to Mr. Osa Hotel, where the other girls were waiting for us. Now that was the end of my challenge, but I felt that I had conquered myself in succeeding in that, and that's a good feeling. I had it once when I was playing soccer with my family and a whole group of Bucks County people who got together on a farm and used the horse paddock for a soccer field. And there I had to run against the men, and the men didn't care that I was a woman. And I felt that I was meeting a challenge there when they knocked me down and really hurt me. And again, I had that feeling that I was triumphing over something very difficult and that I was succeeding. That's a wonderful feeling. I think people only get it when they plunge into something dangerous and find that they can achieve it. And then there are other challenges too. Writing a dissertation, going to college with people who were 40 years younger than myself. That's a challenge, but that was one that I sailed through because I liked academics. I liked to work. I liked literature and study of history of architecture, which was enthralling, at least to me.
Well, you mentioned you enjoyed poetry as well.
Poetry?
Poetry.
Oh yeah, I have some poems, yes, I have. I've had a couple of them published in small magazines. And I love poetry. I love the poets. In fact, when I was learning to make a way of life for myself, I looked into the philosophers because I learned about them in college, and I decided they were not for me. one philosopher would go diametrically opposed to the one before, and in that complete turnaround, I saw something was wrong. You couldn't believe one man and then believe another man who was trying to tell you the same thing in a different way. But when I read the poets, I found that they were really reaching for the truth and that they were honest about it. They were looking for the heart of the matter. And you know the great poems that have been written by Emily Dickinson, by A.E. Housman, by John Keats, by Robert Frost. They're monumental achievements. And I memorized a number of them, which I would recite from time to time. I can recite one for you right now. You'll see how lovely it is, and it speaks to me of the way I feel a number of times as I go about life. And it was written by John Gillespie McGee, a Canadian Air Force soldier who crashed soon after he wrote this poem. But he was a pilot in the Second World War. And my father sent me this poem first, and I memorized it right away, and I have never forgotten it. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter's silver wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of, wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. There I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through silent halls of air. Up, up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent lifting mind I've trod the high untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. And he wrote that, and I see how he learned to do that up in the air, but I had never flown that way, but still I understood and appreciated it and loved it. You know, I had a question for my master's degree, and it was this. We were to write a paper on what would happen if something destroyed all the government papers in the United States or the world, whatever we wanted to write about, and there was only one thing left, and that was the homes, the houses, the buildings. Meanwhile, the other papers that had to do with writing and literature had also been destroyed. So only the houses were left. What did we think? How would we explain which would have been better of the other two, or was it houses and architecture we were best, we would be served best? And we had to write that in full, and we had 2 hours to do it, so we had a lot of time to write it. And I decided that the architecture, the houses, were the finest thing, finest way of saving a culture, of letting descendants know how we lived and what we did. That went beyond the power of written papers and beyond the power of written laws and business papers and that sort of thing. And I filled the 2 hours with writing about how much we could describe, looking at the houses, describe about the way people lived and the way they ate, and much about their thinking and what they loved to have in their houses. And I think that I had the right answer. And anyway, I passed my exam. But I thought that was a very fine question, and it shows it did in the way I tried to prove it, the power of building, the power of art, fine arts, decoration, and creating a life for oneself is shown by a house, a home.
The other day, we were marveling at a photograph of the Buckingham Friends meeting, built in 1767 or 68.
Both. You're right. 68.
By Matthias Hutchison.
69. Yeah.
Just truly a magnificent building, serving the community for 230 some years. And last month you were in Washington to see that the Buckingham Friends Meeting House was placed as a National Historic Landmark.
Yes, that was only 2 weeks ago. I went down with the clerk of our meeting. The clerk is the chairman of the meeting. And I presented a paper that I had written on the significance of the Friends meeting. And they passed it. The committee, the erudite committee there, culled from people all over the country. And it will be put on the landmark list if the chairman of the Department of Interior signs it, and it's a given that he will do that. So that was an achievement. I was happy to be able to do that.
I want to thank you very much, Margaret. This is very enlightening, as always. We could go on for a long time, but certainly this is a wonderful insight into your background and the heritage of your family and of your surroundings that you've given back. You've seen and observed and given back to the community much of what you've learned, and we really appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you for saying so. I have to say that I'm deeply grateful for everything that happened to me. Even though it wasn't always happy, I learned through everything that took place. And I had this rich background in Europe and Indonesia, where we visited our son 2 times, and South America, where we visited friends and cousins, and the islands in the Caribbean, and Norway, Denmark, all sorts of places. And I profited from everything. You do, I think. And so I'm grateful. I'm grateful for my life. I'm grateful for my mother and what she brought, even though it wasn't too happy for her to come over here. But it was happy for her children.
Thank you, Margaret.
You are welcome. Thank you for being such a charming interlocutor.
Oh, thanks.